Okay, good evening, members and guests. It is April the 7th, 2025, and this is a regular online meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. I'm Dennis Baker, the president, and your host this evening. We have an image review this evening, so before we get to that, just a few quick notes. Our next online meeting will be held in 2 weeks. That's April the 21st, and we have a kind of a special presentation that has been popular in the past. It's a member show and tell, and it's going to be hosted by our very own Mark Albano. So, Mark, would you want to comment about that? You have to unmute yourself.
Sure, I'll comment on it. This is kind of a neat presentation setup. Is that we want pictures from our members that they want to talk about from not as much from a technical standpoint as from why they took the picture, what they got out of the picture, um, what it means to them. So it's more of the I won't, I should probably use the word more about the emotional play of the photograph rather than the technical play of the photograph. Thanks, Dennis.
Good, thank you. And if you saw my email, hopefully you chuckled with that. Humorous but yet serious. I'd like to get a lot of people involved with this, as many as possible, especially some newer members, maybe who've been reluctant to participate in the image reviews. Because with this show and tell, as Mark said, you can pretty much tell us whatever you want. You can talk about the technicalities if you choose. You can tell a story behind it, why you took it, what motivated you, whatever you like. So that's up to you. You have what, 5 minutes, right, Mark?
5 minutes, and the more people who contribute, the more interesting it becomes.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you listen to me and fall asleep.
Okay, and we have some trips coming up, so we'll let Jean talk about those trips.
Hello, everyone. This Saturday coming up, we're going to be going to Pine Grove, and Dennis and Mark are going to be leading that. Dennis, do you want to say a couple words about that?
Sure, this has been a great place to go, and this should be really good. Spring is here. Things are turning green as per the theme tonight. The blossoms are out. Some of the trees look beautiful. There might be some kayakers on the lake. So we'll just walk around looking for pictures, sharing ideas, hopefully, and just having a good time. So we hope you're able to join us at Pine Grove Furnace. Check the email, which will be coming out again tomorrow, I'm pretty sure, as a reminder for details, where to meet and so forth and so on. Okay, let's pause for a moment. Anyone have anything they'd like to comment on for the good of the order? If you do, please unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay, I assume no one does. If you do later on, we'll have an opportunity at the end of the meeting. As I said, we have an image review, and we're very fortunate to have with us Bryson Leidich, who's helped out with many, many club meetings in many ways and many image reviews and competitions. So I'm just going to turn it over to Bryson. It's all yours, partner.
Good evening. Before we get deep into things, why, hello to you all, and let me see what happens here. Good. Let me get back to number one. I want to just say a few things right up front. One of them is, and if you're taking notes, now's the time to do it. I'm going to introduce some ideas. One idea in particular is modifications to the tone curve panel in Lightroom. I don't know how many of you use it. It's really, really easy to use, and it can have a lot of very good effects on your images. And if the term curves scares the heck out of you, don't think about that. So the problem with photography is words freak people out when the actuality of the tool is not as bad as it turns out to be. At any rate, I'm going to give you an idea about learning. If you are familiar with Julianne Cost, who is a longtime member of the Adobe team, and she's got more tutorials and learning things on her site than you can possibly imagine. But her site is jkost.com. And if you look under video tutorials and choose Lightroom Classic, excuse me, and then the develop module and pick the tone curve panel, she will discuss using the various aspects of it. I think the easiest thing to do is use the parametric curves, which is the funny looking thing on the left. And it gives you control over highlights, lights, darks, and shadows. And once you get past the basic panel, this would be the next thing that I would recommend as a really, really good tool for modifying your images. So let's get started. I'm going to say, I'm going to try to avoid saying certain things about some of the images based on the quality of the image as presented. And I don't think a lot of those problems are with the original image. I think some of them have to do with JPEG compression. So there's little funny things like what's happening to this man's hat. Now, there's some motion blur in this. That's true. You can especially see it here. You compare this to here where it's dead sharp. But I think some of the odd things that are happening are possibly JPEG compression. So I'll note that, but where appropriate, but I think some of it can be ignored. So I will address other bigger issues with the various images. Now, wearing the Irish green and playing Irish tunes. The first thing I think I would recommend for people to do is to find some images online that are just absolutely really, really good in terms of brightness, contrast, and color. And make a folder for yourself and grab those snipping tool, or there's going to be something in the Mac system that does a similar thing. And drop those images in there and then look at them every once in a while. And what you're doing is you're training your brain to see the way a good image should look. That way, when you bring your images up, you will have this mental comparison that you can make that tells you, this image doesn't match up to what I'm seeing on these really, really good images. What's wrong and how can I fix it? One of the big things I saw as a problem with a lot of the images is underexposure. Most cameras have a tendency to underexpose. They're trying to protect the highlights for JPEGs. And as the problem that it creates is, especially if you're shooting RAW, is that it underexposes the image to protect the highlights in a JPEG, and it really, really underexposes a RAW file significantly. It'll underexpose a JPEG a half to 2/3 of a stop at least. And in terms of shooting RAW images, that can translate to a stop or more of underexposure. So you want to do some testing. You might want to do some exposure compensation adjustment with your camera in order to avoid those problems. You want to learn how to use the histogram. The histogram is a visual representation of the tones in the image. And you got a left side and a right side, and then the space in the middle where everything is gathered, indicating the total values that are being exhibited in the image. If on either end, and in this particular case, especially the left end, those things start to do what they call crawling up the wall. In other words, there's a bunch of solid line up on this left edge of the image. That indicates that there's a whole bunch of tones that have reached zero and are very, very dark. And usually you don't want to see that. Usually we want to see a histogram that has nothing happening on the left, nothing happening on the right, and some kind of a bump in the middle. Now, it doesn't have to be centered. That would be irrelevant. Actually, it's going to be a different shape based on the tones that are in the image. But you don't want to see a big line on the right. You don't want to see a big line on the left. In this image, there's a big line on the left. You can, and the first inclination that most people have is to simply raise exposure. That's the gamma or the intermediate tonal values of the image. And that will help, but it's not the only answer. Relating to the tone curve panel parametrics that I mentioned, if you raise the lights and the darks and do not touch the ends, the highlights or the shadows, you'll see the image brighten. You'll get more detail in the very, very dark areas. And you'll see the color improve because there's more information in the highlights in an image than there is in the shadows in an image. Just take a look here at how bright these reds are. And then the darker it gets, the less saturated the color is. That's typical of a file. And if you improve the brightness, you will also improve the color. In Lightroom, there's a YY. You can show the image, or you have YY where you see the before and after. And that's a really good way to work because you could play with things like the tone curves and you can see what the image looked like before and after you've made your corrections, and that will help you make some decisions. I like the picture overall. I like what's going on. I think it's pretty well done. Nice capture. With the exception of being underexposed, why I think it's a good start, and it can be improved. So play with it. Are we stopping to see whose
If that's
picture it
okay
is?
with you, I'd appreciate doing that.
That's fine.
Good. Okay. Could we have some comments from the photographer, please?
Hi. Whoops, this is from Mary Eileen Carson. Thank you for the comments. I kind of threw it together and should have, I believe, now that I look at it, could have done some more work. Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Eileen. Bryson, your comments beg the question, how do you feel about exposing to the right?
I do it all the time.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people don't realize how a raw image is constructed. If you think about the fact that there's so many thousands of details or pieces of data in an image, half of the information in a raw file is in the first stop at the bright end. So if you underexpose by one stop, you've thrown away 50% of the available image data. That's significant, okay? If you underexpose by two stops, you're down to a quarter of the information you could have had if you'd exposed more properly. There are some recommendations I can make on setting up your camera. You go into your picture styles, and sometimes you have, if you're shooting JPEG, those settings will make a difference on how your image looks. The image settings will not have an effect on the raw file, but what you're looking at on the back of the camera is essentially a JPEG. So if you reduce the contrast and the sharpness and that kind of thing in the camera settings, your JPEG will not look as good, but you will have a closer representation, not a very good one, but a closer representation to what the raw file will be. I have a tendency to go to the right to the point where I start to see some highlights clip. And you say, oh, everybody tells me clipping is bad. That's dangerous. You don't want to do that. Remember that you're looking at a JPEG. If the JPEG starts to clip, you probably are still underexposed in the raw file, because the raw file is going to have some headroom and it's going to exceed a JPEG file by at least a half a stop. You need to do some testing. I had one Canon camera that I shot with a while back that had a full stop of headroom above and beyond what you could find in the JPEG files. So getting to know your camera and learning the histogram, and then being able to make some comparisons and find out, okay, that's what the JPEG looks like on the camera, but what does the raw file look like when I open it in Lightroom or Camera Raw? If you find that all of a sudden all of the tones are left of center and things are crawling up that left-hand wall, you're underexposing and you need to pay closer attention to that. I typically set my camera at plus 2/3 of a stop, just simply because I know it's going to underexpose to begin with, and then I pay very, very close attention beyond that. I shoot entirely manual. I don't, not entirely. And one of the images at the end here will show you what the difference is. But does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I thought I'm sure folks have heard the term exposed to the right, and they might be curious about your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it is. It's the way to go. Number 2, glass vases. Number 1. I like the shot. I like the idea. Again, we're talking underexposure. And everybody goes, well, I want it to be black. Yeah, well, you want it to be black at the extreme end, but you don't want to overdo that, because you'll be dragging dark grays down into black unnecessarily if you overdo that darkening. So be careful of how far down you drag your blacks. I think I would crop off some of the bottom of this image. Other than that, I don't have any problems with the composition. I think it's pretty well done. And let's see. Yeah, that's my notes on that. So whose image?
Hey, Bryson, Dave Marchetto. Thanks very much for your thoughts on that. This one was a study in specular highlight reduction. I just am this year really wanting to get a hold of the reflections, the highlights, talk about exposing to the right, I guess. So this is an attempt at showing the highlights, but the work that I did got rid of quite a bit. My vision, Bryson, was to have as much foreground as I could, but it's a matter of taste. I actually did crop quite a bit. I had the sort of a split image of it at one time, which is kind of interesting. And I guess I used the rule of thirds and cut off quite a bit of the bottom there. I like the black on black, and the green reflections, I think, came out pretty well. The red is not as saturated as I wanted. So here's my last question for you. Those reds I really wanted a lot brighter than I could get them. So here's the thing, Bryson. If I say I went into the, the curve that you're talking about and boosted the reds, and then I got out of the file in Lightroom, and then I pulled it back. So if I boost the reds again, do I end up getting more reds than I did when I closed it? And can you kind of continue to open and close and then continue to boost the reds until you get what you want, if you know what I mean?
I'm not sure why closing the file would have an effect. What do you,
Yeah, it's just my thought that, you bake it in and then you take it back in again and you sort of pick up where you left off. In other words, you got as much red the first time as you can get. Do you get a chance at more red when you close the file and then sort of fake out the program and then start at a baseline of what you've got and then build more red on that? Does it work that way?
well, if you're working with hue, saturation, and brightness, correct?
Yeah.
So you pick the saturation and you pick the reds or the oranges, and you play with the sliders, and they boost them up. Now, if you're doing that in your hue, saturation, and lightness controls, as opposed to trying to do it with vibrance or saturation in the base, right? Okay. Closing and reopening the file should have no effect. It'd be the same as it never closed.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see what you.
All right. So
that's the
that
answer.
wouldn't be. Yeah. You're thinking about what might happen. I think you're thinking about what might happen to a JPEG if you save it and close it and then reopen it. And, that doesn't apply.
Right. Yeah, well,
So,
thanks very much for your thoughts on this. I guess the last thing, and I don't want to take up all the time here, but you've talked about building a tent, around this. And Bryson, I just didn't have the time and interest in building a tent around this, with a, shower curtain or sort of an opaque version of the enclosure that I think would have calmed down these highlights. But it just seemed to be a studio, thing that I just didn't have access to. So I ran, I did this in daylight and then ran for cover.
well, if you build a tent or around this, it would have significantly affect the highlights. But you don't all end up seeing light in places you didn't expect to see it before. This would not be as anywhere near what you're seeing here. The biggest thing that you'll see here is this. You cannot save a specular. So that bright white on the there where your light source is, that's going to stay that way.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but you'll see broader, you won't see like these dark areas. You'll see this continue down into the darks, and play with it. It's worth it. And for certain subjects, it's really great. For other subjects, it can be a real pain in the neck, especially reflective subjects. So, it's something that you have to play with, and then you know how to use it and when to use it. Okay, but you're doing good stuff. So keep it up, Dave.
Well, I really appreciate it. Thanks, Bryson. I always really do appreciate your thoughtful comments.
David and Bryson.
If I can
David
make
and Bryson, this is Dick Messner. Just a real quick question here. If I remember right in Lightroom, if you do a virtual image, don't you go back to 0? And by doing virtual images rather than closing and reopening, could you increase your reds that way?
Well, if it goes back to the original, you'd be starting all over again. So you would not, would not double your effect. No. But Dennis is a real Lightroom guy here. So if you want to have a conversation,
we won't take time now, but I think if you make a virtual image of your processed image, when that virtual image comes up, everything is set right back to 0. and you can increase things again. I believe, but I may
I
be
can-
wrong.
Yeah, but you increase it again, you wouldn't be adding to. You'd be. It's like starting with a whole new image. It really just doesn't make
Yeah,
that
I can
much
comment
difference.
on that. When
Yeah,
when
go
you make
ahead.
a virtual copy, it virtually duplicates the file at the stage at which you are with that particular image. So if you've made
Ah.
some adjustments, the virtual copy will show those same adjustments. Now, this discussion brings to memory a technique that some photographers do use. They'll process an image in Lightroom Classic, then take it to Photoshop, and without doing any adjustments at all in Photoshop, now it's a PFD, a PSD, or a TIFF. They bring it back and they can double process it now in Lightroom Classic. So a copy, Lightroom Classic has made a copy of the image, taken it to Photoshop. So you're working on a copy which already has the original changes you made, and now you can make changes on top of that. So that might resolve your issue, David, that you could double process it.
That's very helpful. These Dennis, these sessions and Bryson are so helpful. I really appreciate your thoughts.
But the other comment would be that if you go into the color panel
Yeah.
on Lightroom, as Bryson was mentioning about the HSL panel, as it used to be called, I would bet you could boost that as much as you want, in Lightroom
Oh yeah,
Classic without having to double
You-
process it.
you could probably overdo it without too much trouble.
I would
Oh,
think.
yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks a lot.
Okay, very good.
Run those sliders all the way until you get in trouble, and then back off.
Right.
You always
sounds
go
my
too
style.
far. Yeah, always go too far, and then you've gone far enough because you can back off of too far. But if you go halfway and then you go halfway again, you never get there.
Yeah, I call it the
know,
extremist approach. Too far to the left, too far to the
Yeah.
right.
Okay, the Conewago Chapel. Good capture, good crop. I see, a good centering and verticals, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not thrilled with the tent over here. I have a feeling that if it were my file, I would be doing a copy and paste here in order to I'd get rid of that. That kind of bothers me a little bit. The file is also, this is another one that's darker than it needs to be. And a slight increase in the darks and the curves would open up that lower end. And one of the things that you'll notice based on that, going back to that conversation about how much information is in a raw file as you go down, that's true of any file that you're working on. And I mentioned on number one about how you can increase the color by increasing the brightness. And that would happen here. If you opened up the darks in this image, you would find that you would have not only more information, but you'd find that the color saturation and the bottom end here would increase as well. So that's about the end of that.
Good.
Whose image?
Okay, Mark, you want to comment on that one?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Bryson. I'll take under account the opening up the bottom. The tent you're talking about was kind of interesting. Is that's the symbol that it's a basilica, and I was trying to find some way to fit it in, but I feel like I have to recompose it to do that properly.
Okay. Well, the problem is you're telling a story, and if the person looking at the image is not familiar enough with the story, this doesn't help to tell the story. It just becomes an imposition. Okay.
Gotcha.
I photographed several churches for an architect, and one of the things that I found is necessary to do is to go through the pews and take out the cards and the hymnals, et cetera, et cetera. So all these little spots. Yeah, it's a nitpicking thing to do, and it's a pain in the neck. And of course, if you're there working for an architect, you can get away with that stuff. If you're just a visitor, maybe you can't. But you know, that's I have to comment based on my experiences, and that would be one of my experiences. So
Oh, no, I greatly
I like,
appreciate that. I greatly appreciate that.
yeah,
Okay, thank you
you
very
got to
much.
work hard.
Your comment about underexposing with the cameras, to go back just for a second. This is a new camera for me, and I have found that when I use the right exposure, I end up with something that's underexposed by about 2/3 to 1 stop.
Yep, that does not surprise me at all.
Mark, can I ask a question here? Is
Yeah.
that Basilica the one that we're going to be visiting soon?
Yes, it certainly is. This was taken when Joe Curtis and I were scouting out a potential tour trip for us, and this is going to be it. The Conowingo Castle is also known as the Basilica down in Hanover. I can't remember its full name. It's the Basilica of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, I think. And the people there are really nice and very helpful. So, Bryson, I might be able to talk her into taking those books and paperwork out.
There you go. Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
doesn't hurt to ask.
Yep,
You can only say no, right?
that's
Yeah.
right.
Green by the Sea, number 4. A little bit of brightening of the lights would probably help the experience on this, maybe the shadows as well. Some of the blacks are clipped, which means that you might be hiding some detail, although there's a lot of low-end detail in here, so it may not make a big difference. The first thing that gets my eye is this white spot up here in the corner. You got to take those out. Pay attention to your edges and your corners. And the remove tool in Lightroom will give you access to clone and heal. And what you do is you take some kind of information from here and essentially replace this with that, so that this simply becomes a dark corner, and then you don't have the problem anymore. So whose image is this?
Well, that's mine. Thank you, Bryson. I don't know how in the world I missed that white spot. Yeah, and now it sticks out like a sore thumb. But yes, yeah, I
Absolutely.
certainly should have gotten rid of that.
Yeah,
My
beat you
bad.
to death. No problem. Diagonally. I like this. Is this intentional camera movement? I guess the maker can tell us that. The total range is very nice. This is not underexposed. If you look at the histogram on this, the information is in the middle. The highlights are not blown out. The shadows are not tanked. I would clone the upper left-hand corner to get rid of this little spot. Again, pay attention to the edges and to the corners. You also have one little bright area in here. And I think if you would go in with the healing brush and just paste over this, heal that a little bit, and then drop the opacity of that heal 50% or less, so that this doesn't disappear. It just simply gets a little darker. When you heal and you clone, you have the opportunity to change the opacity of the effect that you're putting on the image. And that would be something I think would be very, very good to do. I also think you need to go into the effects panel here and introduce a vignette, which is going to darken all the way around, around the image, and that'll kind of hold you in. A comment about vignetting. There is a tendency on the internet right now with a lot of images to have vignetting that is blatantly obvious, almost screaming at you that I've burned down the corners. That's wonderful if that's what you want to do. My use for the vignette is much more subtle than that. And I think what you want to do is you want to drag that vignette down and change the roundness if necessary, increase the softness of the edges if necessary, to the point where if you click it on and off, when it's off, you go, oh, wow, it's too bright. When you click it on, things just seem to feel better and you're held into the image a little bit better. But it's a subtle change. It's not a dramatic change. It's not, you can't see the edges of the vignette. It just has this minor effect on the feeling of the image. And that's the vignette that to me can really enhance a lot of images. So hold on, who's this?
Bryson, this is Mary Fox. That's my image, and it is an ICM. For once, it was, I did it on purpose. Sometimes I just get these things and I don't know how I get them. But I did not see that corner thing up there, you know, so thank you for pointing that out. And the part where that little light piece of grass is, it's grasses, by the way. Yeah, I will follow your advice. And ironically, I use vignetting on every single photograph. It's just real subtle. And I did not do it on this one, and I don't know why. But I like the idea, and I'm really looking forward to adding a vignette to it. So thank you so much.
You just wanted to give me an opportunity to give you a hard time. That's all.
I know I knew you would, Bryson. That's okay. Thank you, Bryson.
Going green. Very bright image, but fortunately not clipped. Nothing is burned out. One of the things you'll notice about snow, and it's primarily obvious here, but not overly obvious here. And that is when you have soft light, like an overcast sky or something, it's very, very difficult to get detail in the snow. Now, like, for example, you don't see it here because it's all flat. You do see it in the window here because the light is coming down. So you do get some shadowing. And this is the kind of thing that everybody goes, oh, I wish I could get that in all my snow pictures. But notice how flat the snow is down here because the light is flat down on it and you're looking down on it. So you don't get the same effect. You don't have any shadowing. The camera looking down at the subject creates a perspective. And that's why the trees appear to see, this is centered, and this is leaning out, these are leaning out. That's perspective created by you tilting the camera down, and you get a perspective correction in the distortion to the image. Can you do anything about it? Yes and no, depending on the image and the subject matter. In this case, I wouldn't fuss with it. And the reason is simple. If you straighten this and you straighten that, the trees are going to look great, but you're going to distort the truck in the process of doing that. And I think that's the more important, since the subject is always the most important part of the image. I wouldn't do that because you would distort the truck, and that just simply would not look good. So that's the end of that. Whose is it?
That's mine. George Kurzik here. Yes, I went out exploring in the snow, and there's an old abandoned truck in a farm not far from my house. And I purposely like distortion a great deal. I shoot it as high a wide angle as I can. But I wanted as to your point, Bryson, I wanted the truck to maintain its perspective as much as possible. I lowered it, I shot it higher, and I like this angle the best. And you're right, perspective in the snow is tough. I always shoot overexposed in the snow anyway, because of grayscale correction. And yeah. I brightened up the green a little bit just to bring that color out in this one.
You did it well. You did it well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the remarks.
This is interesting. I have no idea what it is. I'm not sure I care. I just simply find the image interesting. So I think in adjustments in Lightroom, if you have done them or haven't done them, I would play with the texture and clarity sliders to see what effects it would have on the image. Sometimes it will brighten the colors, sometimes it will sharpen the edges. And I would do that. I would do clarity and texture before I would play with the vibrance or saturation sliders, because they're going to have a different effect on the image. And I think I'd want to see what they did first before I would play with vibrance and saturation. In the crop, it appears that you tried to make this center dead center, and that is good. You've done that, and that's your option. You can do that. I don't think I would complain if you crop some of the bottom off and that center point dropped down a little bit. I don't
They do
think that
yours
would
yet?
bother me at all.
Did they do yours?
Who dat? All done. Who's it belong to?
This is Elaine Shook.
Hi,
Sorry,
Elaine.
a little confused by the interruption. I didn't know if you were ready for me yet.
Oh, yeah.
Believe it or not, there is a photo behind this. It's not intentional camera movement. And it was actually kind of an impulsive upload because as a nature photographer, I have thousands and thousands of images with green in it. But most of them have green in the background, which I tend to downplay unless it's a subject. But this one just kind of jumped out at me when I was thinking about something green to upload. And it's actually a photograph of a green coleus plant with some yellow and red tones in it. And I was just playing around in Photoshop using the distort tools. I think this one was called Twirl, and playing with the blending modes as well, just to come up with something fun. And this is what I came up with. Now my raw file, and I think even my JPEG file of this, does not look as blurry as this one, and I don't know why. But this does not look clear to me at all. I did use clarity even before I brought it into Photoshop, in a number of other exposure adjustments to make it look more clear. And I don't know why it looks as
I don't think that's your problem. I think that's something that Dennis and I are having a discussion about, and that is the way the images are being brought into the PDF, and we're going to try to see if we can rectify that. Yeah, that should be no problem.
Okay.
Yeah, good. Elaine has just basically said you have to play in Photoshop, and that's exactly what you have to do. You never know when you're going to come up with something really cool. This is nice. I like this a lot.
well, this was a process that was kind of in vogue a number of years ago. And I did not discover it until about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. And by that time, it was kind of out of vogue. But it's one that kind of requires a very specific recipe per se. And if you don't use it often enough, you have to continue to go back to that recipe in order to know how to do it. But there are certain variables that you can play with that just will make it look different than anything that you've ever seen. So it's just a fun thing to do. But thank you
Indeed.
for your comments.
Very nice. Very nice. Details of life. Interesting, and a couple of suggestions on this one. Some adjustments to the highlights and the lights in the tone curves thing that I've been talking about will tone down the overall brilliance. The image just, again, you have to have that mental set as to what an image should look like, and this looks bright to me, overly bright. So those things could be easily corrected. I would crop off the top to get rid of this in particular, and maybe this as well. I would add a vignette. That's going to help. And I would heal the bright spots in the distance. And again, this is going to be here, here, this stuff, this stuff. And then back off on the opacity so that they end up not disappearing. They end up just simply being a little darker than they are right now, so that your attention stays in the foreground. In the color mixer, I suggest you go there and you darken the yellows and the greens. The yellows is going to have strangely an effect on the tones in here more than it is the grass. You would think that that would have an effect, but it doesn't. And the greens will darken the grass and help keep your attention on your primary subject matter. I would darken this area here as well. You can do that with masking and exposure or other tools. So there's no problem with that. You've got something worth playing with here. I think I'd just spend a little bit more time on it. That's all. Who's that?
Bryson, hi, it's Richard Scar. Yeah, this is a little bit of a grab and go picture. I took it in Ireland, and I wrestled a lot with it afterwards. So because it was more mental exercise to try to see whether I wanted to get more acuity in having the viewer know that there is writing on all of these gravestones. So I played with that a lot. Then I realized I was ruining the back of it in terms of darkening, whatever. So I wrestled between all the points you say, and I agree with everything you said, and that's very helpful to try to create much more verve and balance in it. So thanks.
Sure enough. I think some of the fine detail is part of this issue we're having with the way the images are being saved and uploaded. And I think maybe some things will resolve on that in the future. So I like this guy. He's really cool. And I'm particularly happy that you included the foot here. This is really kind of cool. It's a nice sharp subject. I think some minor brightening of the whites and adding some clarity with a clarity slider would be helpful. I would add a mask, a brush mask. So that means you can brush in or certain areas, and you brush in here, 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 over here, etc. And then you can reduce the exposure and the highlights, and that would tend to keep the attention up here on the head. What you want to do is you want to make sure that your primary subject is where the eye goes all the time. So anything you can do to keep other tonal values in the image from attracting the eye so that your primary center of attention remains where it should be. I think I would put a soft vignette on this at the end, and that would just tend to pull the whole thing together. It's very nicely caught and nicely done. Who did this?
That is mine, Joan Smith. I agree with everything you said. I put worked on this a lot because it was shot very far away at Wildwood Lake, and I was just so happy I caught the bird semi in focus. But he's in the direct sun, and I did work on the spots, the sunlight spots, a lot to bring them down, but I guess I didn't bring them down far enough. And I appreciate your comments.
You're welcome, and it's a good image. Just keep playing.
Thank you.
Somebody said that photography has reached a point where it has matched up with art in terms of the fact that it is never done, it is only discarded.
One quick question. When you mentioned the clarity, were you talking about the underneath of the leaf or overall?
Mine's next.
If you increase the clarity slider, it's going to increase it over
Right,
the
it'll-
entire image unless you make a mask first.
Right, right. I just didn't know if, because actually on my computer, this is super sharp. So alluding back to the downloading, I guess, or uploading of the photos. But I didn't know if you meant on the underside of the leaf or the whole thing. So you mean the whole thing, hit Claire.
Well, I
clarity?
think what you need to do is I play with the clarity slider at the beginning of most images and watch
Okay.
and see what happens. It's going to have a greater effect on things that are already primarily sharp, but it's going to
Gotcha.
try
Yeah.
to sharpen and increase contrast in things that are less so, like here. And if that doesn't create a problem, fine. If it does create a problem, then you just simply go to masking and you use the clarity within the mask and not in the other areas. You can also take clarity and run it to the left instead of to the right, and you
Right.
can soften the image.
Yeah.
And so you can take that to remove sharpness and attention to detail in places where you don't want it to be. So that's another technique that sometimes people don't consider.
Right. I use that on people a lot.
Yeah, well, it's very good on people. Yeah,
It is very good on people. Thank you very much.
absolutely. An interesting image. I like it. There's several things I would do here. None of them are particularly difficult, but they do take a little time and a little bit of thought. You have to say, my technique is real simple. I look at an image and the first thing I say is, what is there that doesn't need to be there? What is there that I can get rid of that's going to make this image stronger? First thing I would do would be crop. So if you crop, because this stuff up here is irrelevant, it doesn't have anything to do with enhancing the image. So you take your crop tool and you bring it down so that this stuff up here disappears. You could lose enough of the left to make this go away, or you could heal it. You could lose a little bit of the bottom and get this to go away, or you could heal it. And I think healing is perfectly fine. That's dandy. I think I might heal this. And I might heal this or clone it to the point where it just simply disappears because it's not doing anything visually that's valuable to me. This is the ticket right here. So I'd get rid of this, and the top. Okay, then I'd take a radial gradient, very soft in the bottom, and I would darken this area. And as soon as you start to darken it, what'll happen is you'll notice that these tones start to match these tones. So you have a more uniform overall look. I think that would be a good thing, and you can reduce the highlights in the tone curve to do that. Then you add a vignette, soft but barely noticeable. You want to feel it more than you want to see it, and you would end up with a much, much stronger image. It's a very good start. It just needs a little bit more work. Hold on. Who dat?
All right, this is, I don't know if you can hear me. I'm out in the middle of nowhere trying to set in a meeting. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Yes.
great. Great, because I didn't see my video on anywhere. And it's good to see Bryson. It's Terry Baylor, Bryson. Bryson and I go back a long way, back to high school.
Too long.
Yeah, it's getting that way. That's for darn sure. Appreciate your comments. This gives
me some work to do because when I took this, I was thinking about the composition, and it was a big question on that upper leaf. I think you're right. It's just more composition contrast than I need. I'm trying to contrast the vertical lines with the horizontal leaf.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
we can hear you, Terry, but you're breaking up a little bit. So
yeah,
I see your face.
Oh, you do? Okay, because I'm in the middle of Caledonia State Park,
Oh,
and
goodness gracious.
reception is not real good here. Thank
Okay.
you.
Talk to you
Thanks.
soon, I hope. Sunrise at 1,200 feet. I did a lot of this kind of photography. So I'm going to give you a couple of hints and a couple of solutions to your problems. This image is soft. I think the capturing into the PDF is partially responsible, but I'm going to make some suppositions, and the maker can tell me whether or not it's accurate. Was it shot through the window? Yes or no? When we get to you. Whenever you're shooting from an airplane, I did some work from an airplane. You shoot with the window open. Airplane people have a tendency to balk at removing doors. So I had a tendency to prefer flying in helicopters because I could fly with the whole door removed. That gave me a lot more flexibility and no wing to deal with. So when you're shooting, depth of field is no problem. You don't need F8, F11, F16, any of that kind of stuff. My recommendation would be to shoot between F4 and F5.6. My primary lens on shooting aerials was a 24 to 105 F4. So my preference was to shoot at F5.6. Everything is, for all intents and purposes, at infinity. So your depth of field is not a big deal. Your exposure, depending on what you're doing. Now, I would fly circles around a subject. So let's say we wanted to shoot this field, we'd fly a 360 around it. Well, when you do that, the lighting is changing constantly. So it's behind you, and then you're over here, it's in front of you, and here it's inside, and here it's inside. In order to avoid having issues with constantly changing exposure variables, I took to going to aperture priority. So I'd set the camera at 5.6, set it to aperture priority, use a higher ISO than I would normally use, but you have to test, you go, how high can I go before I start getting a noise that I cannot stand or deal with? And I could usually shoot at 800 with no trouble, sometimes 1200 ISO, and have no problems whatsoever. The aperture priority would mean that the camera is solving the problem of changing exposure, and I could just concentrate on composition and shoot away, and everything worked out just dandy. I would crop the image. There's no point to the sky. So I'd crop down until I got into this distant foliage here. And then you'd have an image that makes perfect sense. One of the issues you have with this is that the further away from you, the more haze you get from aerial haze. A perfect day is rare in the East Coast. So, maybe if you flew in Arizona, you'd have better luck. But this is very, very typical of East Coast aerial photography. The solution to this is actually pretty simple. You want to take a linear gradient and you bring it down from the top. You bring it all the way down here until you start to run into the stuff that looks, quote, normal, unquote. And then the first thing you grab is the dehaze slider. As you increase the dehaze slider tends to darken the darks before it works on the highlights of the midtones. That's going to add contrast and kind of cut. That's why it's called dehaze. Gives the effect of cutting through the haze, and it's going to bring these total values down closer to this. And the linear gradient, since it's going to be very strong at the top and then fade off as you go down, is going to put that effect more at the top than it will as you go down. So you'll see how it blends it in. You may also have to increase contrast a little bit. You may, in fact, need to do more than one gradient in order to actually blend it in. Yes, add a vignette, because these edges and stuff will have a tendency to benefit from that. And then if you add sharpening in the detail tab, use a high detail and masking setting, and between them, you'll find that your overall image improves considerably. But the big deal is don't shoot through the window. Do that. All done.
Okay, Bryson, I don't think that Steve Shedlin's on board tonight, so that would be it.
Okie doke.
Any closing comments?
Not for me. Does anybody have any closing questions?
Okay, let's open it up. Anybody have any questions or comments for Bryson or any one of the submitting photographers?
I have a question for Bryson. Bryson, if I were out photographing nature, birds early in the morning, and I had a very hard time getting a proper exposure with a fast shutter speed because the birds are moving around. And I could either A, bump my ISO up on the shoot in camera, or I could sacrifice that and then do that and increase the ISO, so to speak, in post-processing. What would your advice be on that situation?
I always prefer to have as much control and as much information in the original raw file as possible. So I would go with increasing the ISO in the camera. Also, people would get freaked out about high ISO and noise. I have shot images at 3200 ISO and ended up with a noise-free image without significant work in noise reduction. A proper exposure is way more important than a lot of people think. And as soon as you have to start increasing exposure and salvaging information in post-processing, that's where you generate noise. So the closer that exposure is to good to begin with, the better off you're going to be. I would say that 99% of my, no bragging here, just commenting, 99% of my images had an exposure change of less than a half a stop, plus or minus. I would much rather deal with the whites and the blacks and then fuss around with some of the tone curves in order to change the brightness of certain areas of the image, and then I would fussing with the exposure slider. So if you spot meter and do things to make sure that your subject is properly exposed. There's two ways to expose an image. One of them is to expose for the whole image, which is what typically we do with landscapes. So you have this overview of the total values in the image, and you base everything on how it's going to be at the high end and how it's going to be at the low end, blah, blah, blah. The second way to expose is to pay attention to the subject, the heck with the background. This is something that wedding photographers very often need to think about. You've got a lady in a very expensive, beautiful white dress. She has to be properly exposed. If she's standing in front of a bright window, the heck with the window. Go for the girl. All right. If you're dealing with a bird and that bird happens to be a little on the dark side, coming up with an appropriate exposure for the total values of that bird is way more important than anything that has to do with the background behind the bird. You can always deal with that later in post, and anything you do to the background is going to be less important than the bird anyway. So the subject is the important thing. Deal with that, and then fuss with the rest later. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
Joe, hi, this is Rich Scar. As an amateur, I'll tell you how I cheat on that. I try to do what Bryson was just saying. I probably don't overexpose enough, but I cheat by doing burst shots because that bird will shift positions, its head or whatever, and you find that you get certain light on certain parts of the body that in the end you can choose which one you like the best. But that's the amateur cheating.
Oh yeah. There's no such thing as cheating. You're just doing it a little differently, right? Yeah. Don't stop until you get the good picture.
Okay.
And shoot more pictures.
Yeah, Bryson, this is Dave again. I'm exploring using the denoise function on Lightroom. How does it work? And when would you use the denoise slider and when wouldn't you?
I don't use it a lot. I'd have to think about that. I think if the simplest answer from a logical standpoint would be if you're looking at the image and you move the slider and it has a positive effect, then go for it. I think if it starts to do things that aren't good, and sometimes denoise can start to eat into the image information, particularly fine detail. So you want to come up with a compromise between, is it helping the noise or is it ruining the detail? And ruining the detail, of course, is not a good idea. So, if it starts to help, fine. If it starts to damage the image, I would rather live with the noise. There are also other ways to get rid of noise, and noise is not necessarily the worst thing in the world. We have to remember one thing. When you're looking at an image on a monitor resolution is arguably 100 pixels per inch. You may have a huge monitor, which is different, or a smaller monitor, which is different. But when you're looking at an image at 100% on a screen, it's already approximately 3 times as big as it's going to be in a finished print or JPEG file, and possibly even more. So you're going to see more noise on that screen than you're going to see in your final image. The other thing is, if you're printing, or if you, shameless advertising spot coming up, or if you would send something to me to print, noise reduction and sharpening in the printing process can be significant. And you'd be amazed at how much stuff I've seen in terms of noise in a file on the monitor. And when the print comes out of the printer, you see none of it because of the words like stochastic. That's it. You got to remember where to put the T and where to put the CH. The way that the tones are blended by the process of actually making the print, some of that noise has a tendency just to hide by default, and you don't know this until you go through the process, and then you see that print coming out, and you go, "Gee, all that noise disappeared." So don't get overly excited about noise unless it's really, really noticeable. I worry more about color noise than I do about detail noise, as if that makes any sense to you. Color noise is when you start seeing rainbow-like colors, in, especially in the shadows. I think where you'd see that, I would worry about that more, and that would show up on dark birds. Color noise on dark birds can be an issue, so you want to watch for that.
Oh, another good reason not to underexpose your image, right, Bryson?
Absolutely. Exposed to the right. All done.
Other questions or comments?
I have one other question for you, Bryson. Do you, considering, we'll just put this in the context of landscape photography, do you ever do HDR, high dynamic range, or do you ever bracket your exposures?
Yes. Anything else you want to know?
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I've used HDR where necessary. I think HDR, people have a tendency to jump for HDR unnecessarily. If you have a good exposure and you have a tonal range of capture capability in the camera where you don't clip at one end or the other, if you can keep all the stuff within the two ends of the histogram in one shot, there's not a lot of reason to go to HDR. If you have such an incredible dynamic range in the subject that you need to go to HDR, fine, that's not a problem. Use as few images as necessary. People forget that these images overlap. So the information overlaps as you go, and you don't need 7 images, for example, in order to get a good HDR. I think where I would be most interested in would be if you had something with a very bright area that needed a lot of detail, and I'd be concerned about it. And in the process, you had a very dark part of that image that also you would want a lot of image detail in. So you'd want to have 2 exposures there and blend them together. But I do have a tendency very often to do my own blending as opposed to turning that image over to an HDR process, if that makes any sense to you. It's not as hard as you think, and it can be very, very productive. Saving shadows is one of the things I do with that quite a bit, actually.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
I would just like to say it's been a very interesting meeting, and thank you to everybody.
Okay, thanks, Dick.
Thanks, Dick.
Okay,
I would be
Bryson.
happy. I would be happy to process some images online at some point if that is something that interests you. I think I've seen you do that with other people.
Ooh,
Yes,
sounds like an
please.
Look at the
upcoming meeting. Yes. Okay, thanks, Bryson.
My
Appreciate
rates are
the
reasonable.
Yeah, I could hear that regret.
It's an offer we can't refuse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, if you'll please unmute yourselves. We'll do our little traditional thing here at the end of the meeting and give Bryson a nice round of applause for his informative comments.
Thanks so much,
Thank you,
Bryson.
Bryson.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great job.
Thank you.
Hang in there, Bryson. Nice job.
Okay,